The alien warlord hurled the Earth flag across the chamber floor and spat a guttural laugh that rattled the crystal walls, and for a moment it seemed as though the galaxy itself was mocking humanity. The diplomat froze mid-sentence, his face paling as the roar of alien laughter spread around the hall like a thunderstorm. Earth's first formal negotiation with the Cthar Dominion was collapsing before it had even begun, and all the world's hopes for peace were dying in the sound of cruel, resonant laughter. Behind the trembling diplomat stood a Marine, Sergeant Marcus Kane, who quietly muttered a joke about the Warlords' ridiculous head crest, and though no one heard him, his eyes narrowed as if he already knew he would have to step forward before the day was done. Harold Pendleton had spent months rehearsing his speech. Every syllable had been polished, every phrase designed to project dignity and power. He imagined himself in the history books as Earth's first successful envoy to a galactic empire. Yet standing in that chamber, facing beings twice his height with tusks sharper than spears, his carefully crafted words shriveled like paper and fire. He straightened his bow tie, cleared his throat, and launched into the second page of his prepared remarks, as though sheer formality could overwhelm the smirks and chuckles rolling through the alien ranks. The Cthar warlords did not believe in subtlety. Their armor was a living, shifting black metal that rippled as though it drank the light of the chamber. Their laughter carried menace, each sound like a hammer blow, and Harold's voice grew thinner and thinner against it. He spoke of Earth's progress, its science, its art, but the aliens saw only weakness. They mimicked his gestures, exaggerating the way he held his hands, parodying his mannered bow. One even clutched its belly and rolled on the floor in mock agony, roaring with amusement at the idea that this fragile human thought he could speak for his entire species. Marcus Kane had been assigned as security, his orders simple: stand still, keep the diplomat alive, and do not speak unless directly addressed. He was a Marine who had fought in deserts, jungles, and cities reduced to rubble, but nothing had prepared him for standing silently in the face of cosmic ridicule. He clenched his jaw. His instincts told him this was worse than an insult, it was a test. The Cthar were measuring Earth's strength by how its representative endured humiliation. And Harold, in his polished shoes and trembling voice, was failing spectacularly. Harold shuffled through his notes, sweat glistening on his forehead. He tried to raise his voice, to inject authority into his words, but his throat betrayed him. The warlords jeered louder, pounding their massive fists on the stone tables, the sound echoing like thunderclaps. For the Earth delegation, every second felt like a nail in humanity's coffin. The aliens were not merely mocking Harold, they were preparing themselves to dismiss Earth entirely, perhaps even to crush it. Marcus shifted his weight, boots scraping against the polished floor. His eyes scanned the alien crowd, and in that instant he saw something Harold missed. The warlords were not laughing purely out of contempt. They were watching, waiting, almost hungry for a reaction. They thrived on challenge, on boldness, on raw defiance. They wanted to see Earth push back. And Earth, through Harold, was giving them nothing but quivers and quakes. The realization hit Marcus with the clarity of a battlefield epiphany. If someone did not step up, Earth would be dismissed as prey. Harold, in desperation, attempted a joke about humanity's resilience, something about surviving plagues and wars. His voice cracked mid-punchline, and the chamber exploded with even louder laughter, this time openly cruel. A warlord slammed his armored hand down and shouted in a booming voice that Earth must be a planet of jesters. Another bared his tusks and growled that humans could be used as court entertainers. The laughter stung like bullets. Marcus's fists clenched. He could almost hear his drill sergeant from years ago. There comes a time when silence kills more surely than bullets. The breaking point came when Harold's hands shook so violently that his cue cards slipped and scattered across the floor like snow. The aliens howled, stomping their armored feet, the chamber shaking with their derision. Harold bent to gather his notes, his face red with humiliation, but his knees buckled under the weight of shame. For the Cthar, this was victory. For the Earth delegation, it was annihilation. In that silence between one burst of laughter and the next, Marcus Kane exhaled, stepped forward, and broke every rule he had been given. His voice cut across the chamber like a rifle shot. That's enough. The laughter faltered, not because his words were eloquent, but because no one expected them. He stood tall, shoulders squared, battle scars visible on his face. His tone was not polished or diplomatic, it was raw, weary, and firm. You think he represents all of us? He doesn't. He's here because he talks fancy. I'm here because I fight. The warlords tilted their tusked heads, intrigued. The sudden defiance, the lack of fear, the blunt honesty, these were the first signs of strength they had seen from Earth. Harold sputtered in horror, whispering for Marcus to stop, but the Marine ignored him. You want to laugh at us? Fine. Go ahead. But know this, every laugh means nothing if you ever step foot on Earth. Because we'll fight you with whatever we've got, sticks and stones if we have to, and we won't stop. Ever. There was no poetry in his words, no rehearsed grandeur. But his voice carried the weight of battlefields, of brothers lost, of a man who had already stood against worse odds and survived. The warlords fell into an unexpected silence, the kind that hums with possibility. Then, as if on cue, one warlord let out a booming bark of laughter, but this time it was different. It was not scornful. It was approving. Another joined in, and another, until the chamber roared with a new kind of laughter, admiration cloaked in amusement. They called him bold, foolish, reckless, and perhaps the only kind of human worth listening to. For the first time, the balance shifted. Humanity was no longer a joke, not entirely. The diplomat's words had crumbled, but the Marine's raw defiance had cracked open a door that might lead to survival. And as the warlords beckoned Marcus closer, inviting him to face their trials, the Marine understood with sudden clarity that Earth's future now rested not on polished speeches, but on his unpolished courage. The chamber had grown quieter after Marcus spoke, but the silence did not last long. The alien warlords had not gathered across the stars simply to listen. They were creatures of action, and they demanded proof. The Overlord Xyrr, seated upon a throne made from the bones of some extinct titan, rose with a low growl that echoed through the vast hall. His tusks gleamed like ivory blades and his voice carried the weight of command as he declared that words, whether polished or raw, meant nothing without trial. If humanity wanted recognition, if this Marine truly wanted to be heard, he would have to survive the gauntlet. The hall erupted in thunderous approval, armored fists hammering stone tables, the sound reverberating like a war drum. Harold Pendleton nearly fainted. He stumbled forward, waving his hands in panic, sputtering about agreements, negotiations, and international law, but his voice was drowned beneath the cheers. His bow tie seemed to shrink on his trembling throat as he turned to Marcus with wide eyes and hissed that they must refuse. Marcus only gave a half shrug. His instincts told him that refusal meant irrelevance, and irrelevance in this place could very well mean annihilation. He muttered that if the aliens wanted a show, then they would get one. Harold's jaw dropped, but before he could protest further, Xyrr clanged a massive war hammer against the floor, and the chamber walls shifted as though alive. Metal slabs parted, revealing a circular arena of light and shadow that descended deep below. The gauntlet, as it was named, was not a single trial but a series of challenges meant to measure strength, wit, and endurance. Many who entered never left. For the Cthar, survival in the gauntlet proved worthiness to exist among them. The first trial began before Marcus even had time to adjust his gloves. He was led into a chamber of shifting stone tiles that glowed faintly with alien runes. Harold's muffled voice behind the protective barrier urged him not to move, to wait for instructions, but Marcus trusted no instruction manual would be forthcoming. The warlord announcer roared that the human must align the tiles to unlock the path forward. Marcus stared down at the symbols, utterly baffled. It looked like a puzzle, some intergalactic Sudoku nightmare, and Marcus felt his stomach twist. He was a Marine, not a code breaker. His pulse thumped loudly in his ears as alien eyes bore down on him from above. He crouched to examine the strange glowing panels, then sighed and muttered to himself about how he wished he had something to eat while he thought. He pulled a crumpled energy bar from his pocket, unwrapped it, and chewed as he nudged one of the tiles absent-mindedly with his boot. The tile shifted, locking into place with a sharp click, and suddenly 2 other tiles lit up in sequence. Marcus froze, mouth full of chocolate and oats. He kicked again, this time deliberately, and more tiles slid into alignment. In under a minute, his snack crumbs and lazy nudges had solved what the aliens thought an impossible puzzle. The chamber doors opened with a triumphant blast of horns. Above, the warlords blinked in stunned silence before bursting into laughter that shook the air. Some roared with anger, claiming it was blind luck, but others shouted that luck was merely another form of strength. Marcus spat out a peanut fragment and muttered that he was just warming up, though inside he was laughing at the absurdity of it. Harold, however, was nearly having a breakdown. His entire life of polished speeches and protocols was being dismantled by a soldier with a candy bar and careless boots. He slammed his hands against the protective glass, yelling that Marcus was embarrassing Earth further. But the aliens were not laughing in mockery this time. They were laughing with a kind of primal joy, as though they had just been handed a story they would retell for generations. To them, Cain had displayed a reckless confidence that screamed defiance of fate itself. The second trial tested endurance. Marcus was led into a wide pit where gravity itself seemed heavier, each step pressing down as though he carried the weight of an armored tank on his shoulders. He saw alien warriors in the stands nodding approvingly, expecting the human to collapse in seconds. His muscles strained, his lungs burned, but Marcus pushed forward, muttering sarcastic complaints about Marine training drills and boot camp sergeants who seemed worse than this gravity pit. The aliens tilted their heads, curious at his running commentary. When he stumbled and nearly fell, he shouted at the invisible weight, calling it nothing compared to his mother's disapproval after his teenage years. That earned a bark of alien laughter from XYR himself, who found the Marine's constant humor under suffering oddly appealing. By the time Marcus reached the far side of the pit, drenched in sweat, the crowd was chanting his name in guttural approximations. Even those who had scoffed at him earlier now leaned forward with genuine intrigue. Cain collapsed onto one knee, gasping, but he raised a finger toward the warlords as if to say he was not done yet. Harold groaned in exasperation, pressing his forehead against the glass, mumbling that civilization was doomed. The third and final challenge of that day was combat, though the aliens restrained themselves from unleashing their true gladiators. Instead, they sent in a training beast, a reptilian creature with tusks like scythes and a hide like rock. Marcus sized it up, unarmed and already exhausted. The creature snarled, circling him, its eyes glowing with savage hunger. Harold screamed for guards to intervene, but the aliens silenced him with glares. Marcus steadied himself, recalling the countless training hours of hand-to-hand drills. He would not outmuscle the beast, but perhaps he could outthink it. When the creature charged, Marcus sidestepped, grabbing a fallen spear from the arena floor. He jabbed it into the ground, using it as leverage to vault onto the beast's back. The crowd roared. The beast bucked violently, but Marcus clung on, pounding its thick skull with the butt of the spear. He shouted insults at it as if it were a stubborn mule back on Earth, his voice carrying equal parts desperation and comedy. Finally, with a guttural roar, he drove the spear into a soft seam at the base of its skull. The creature collapsed with a ground-shaking thud. Marcus slid off, panting, drenched in sweat and blood that was not his own. He raised his arms, not in polished triumph but in raw survival instinct. The warlords rose to their feet. For the first time since Earth had stepped into that chamber, the aliens' cheers were not mocking but genuine. The Overlord clanged his hammer once more and declared that the human marine had passed the opening trials of the gauntlet. There were more yet to come, but Earth had proven itself not a planet of jesters but of fighters who could earn respect in the most ancient of ways. Marcus wiped grime from his face and muttered that he had just wanted a quiet deployment. Harold buried his head in his hands, despairing that galactic diplomacy had devolved into a circus. But deep down, even Harold could not deny that Earth had been given a chance it would never have earned through speeches alone. And that chance now rested squarely on the shoulders of a Marine who had stumbled into legend. The air in the Great Hall grew heavier after the second day of trials. Marcus Cain had survived puzzles, gravity pits, and a reptilian monstrosity, and though he stood battered and bruised, the warlords now regarded him with a curiosity that bordered on respect. Yet beneath the thunder of approval and the roar of alien laughter, a darker undercurrent stirred. Not every faction among the Cthar wanted peace. For some, war was the lifeblood of their empire, and the sight of a human marine winning their challenges threatened the very excuse they needed to crush Earth and claim it as spoils. Shadows lingered at the edge of the council chamber, where armored figures whispered of dishonor and betrayal. That evening, while Marcus rested in his assigned quarters, a chamber lined with strange pulsating crystals that hummed faintly like a heartbeat, Harold Pendleton stormed in, his face red with indignation. He hissed that Marcus was not only embarrassing Earth but also putting the planet in jeopardy. Diplomacy was supposed to be handled with words, with treaties and delicate balances, not by brawling like savages. Marcus, lying on a stone bench and chewing on another ration bar, gave Harold a weary grin and asked him how those words were working out so far. Harold sputtered, unable to form a retort, before stomping out muttering about how history would judge this travesty. Marcus had little time to dwell on Harold's tantrums. Before dawn, alien guards arrived in a formation that suggested both respect and suspicion. They escorted him through winding halls carved into the living stone of the citadel, until they emerged into an arena unlike anything Marcus had seen before. The Blood Arena, as the announcer's voice thundered across the expanse, was a pit reserved for final judgments, where warriors proved not just their skill but their very right to live. The crowd that filled the towering terraces was larger than before, tens of thousands of warlords and soldiers roaring their approval, their tusks glinting under the harsh red light that bathed the arena. Marcus stepped onto the sand, rolling his shoulders, feeling the weight of countless eyes pressing down on him. Across the arena, gates creaked open with a sound like groaning mountains, and from the shadows emerged his opponent. The creature was not a beast this time but a warrior, nearly 3 times his size, clad in jagged armor and wielding twin blades that crackled with energy. The warlords cheered the name of this gladiator, a champion who had slain dozens in combat, and Marcus realized that this was no trial of endurance or wit. This was meant to be his execution disguised as a spectacle. The champion advanced with measured steps, blades humming, and Marcus's instincts screamed at him to keep moving. He circled, searching for weaknesses, but the alien's armor seemed impenetrable, and his weapons hissed with power that could slice through steel. The crowd jeered when Marcus picked up a discarded shield that looked like it had been broken in half. He held it anyway, muttering under his breath about always being handed the worst equipment. The gladiator swung, the blade colliding with the shield in a crack of energy that rattled Marcus's bones. He barely managed to roll aside, sand spraying into the air as the crowd roared. Each strike from the alien was devastating, forcing Marcus into a desperate dance of dodges and parries. His shield splintered with every hit until it was barely more than a handle with jagged scraps attached. But Marcus's eyes gleamed with a stubborn determination. He remembered every training drill, every close call in battlefields back on Earth where improvisation had kept him alive. He baited the gladiator into overcommitting, feinting weakness, stumbling deliberately to lure him in. When the alien lunged, Marcus hurled the remnants of the shield into his face, a cloud of shards and dust that bought him a precious second. He dove low, grabbing a length of chain from the arena floor, likely discarded from some previous bout, and wrapped it around the alien's ankle. The gladiator snarled, swinging his blade down, but Marcus pulled hard, toppling the giant off balance. The crowd gasped as the warrior stumbled, crashing to the ground in a shower of sand. Marcus pounced, slamming his knee into the alien's chest and driving a fist repeatedly into the narrow slits of exposed flesh at the base of his helm. It was messy, brutal, and unrefined, but it worked. The gladiator roared in pain, flailing, but Marcus grabbed one of the twin blades and jammed it upward into the gap under the alien's chin. The sound of cracking bone and sizzling energy filled the air as the warrior went still. Silence washed over the arena for a single, tense heartbeat. Then, like a tidal wave, the crowd erupted in cheers so thunderous that the ground seemed to tremble. The warlords roared Marcus's name, pounding their fists in approval, their tusks glinting in the crimson light. The overlord himself rose from his throne, his eyes glowing with something resembling pride, and declared that the human Marine had proven himself a warrior worthy of recognition. Marcus staggered to his feet, bloodied and bruised, raising the alien blade in exhausted triumph. Yet not all faces in the stands were smiling. In the shadowed balconies, figures cloaked in dark armor exchanged furious glances. The Marine's victory was not just a surprise, it was a threat. If Earth could earn respect through one man, the argument for immediate conquest grew weaker. The conspirators of war could not allow this. One of them leaned close to another, whispering words that carried the weight of treachery. Soon, they said, the Marine would be exposed as a fraud, a cheater, a dishonorable trickster. His victories would be undone, and Earth's fate sealed. As Marcus was escorted out of the blood arena, his muscles aching and his vision blurred from exhaustion, he felt the shift in the air. The warlords had cheered him, but there were eyes that burned with hatred. He was no longer just a curiosity or a challenger. He had become a symbol. And symbols were dangerous, both to those who admired them and to those who feared them. He clutched the alien blade still dripping with dark blood, muttering a tired joke about souvenirs, but beneath his sarcasm, he knew the path ahead would not simply be more trials. It would be betrayal, sabotage, and battles fought not just in the arena, but in the shadows where politics and treachery thrived. That night, as the Citadel's corridors echoed with distant chants of his name, Marcus lay awake in his quarters, the alien weapon resting beside him. His thoughts drifted to Earth, to the people who had no idea that their fate was being decided light years away. He wished he could laugh it off, wished he could treat it like another deployment, but he knew the truth. The warlords would either respect humanity because of him, or crush it despite him. And somewhere in the shadows, enemies already plotted to ensure the latter. Harold Pendleton could not hide his seething jealousy any longer. The council chambers echoed with talk of the Marine who had slain a champion in the blood arena, who had walked through impossible trials and survived. Warlords who had once scoffed at Earth now spoke Marcus Kane's name with grudging respect, some even with admiration. For Harold, who had dreamed of being the face of Earth's triumph, it was unbearable. He paced the delegation quarters, muttering to himself about how history was slipping through his fingers, how a brute in combat boots was stealing what should have been his destiny. Marcus, slouched against the wall sharpening the alien blade he had claimed, only smirked and reminded Harold that survival mattered more than speeches. Harold snapped that civilization was built on diplomacy, not fists, but even as he said it, the sound of alien war chants from outside seemed to mock his words. Unbeknownst to either of them, conspirators were already at work. In the dim-lit corridors of the Citadel, a group of armored Kthar gathered in secret. They were not amused by Marcus's victories. To them, every cheer for the human Marine was an insult to their traditions, a sign of weakness infecting the Dominion. They whispered of dishonor, of betrayal, and they plotted a way to unravel the Marine's growing influence. If they could brand him a cheat, a fraud who mocked the trials, then his victories would crumble into ash and Earth would be back where it belonged, trembling before the Dominion's might. The opportunity came the next morning. Marcus was summoned before the council for recognition, a formal acknowledgement of his survival in the blood arena. Harold fussed over his uniform, warning him not to speak out of turn, but Marcus ignored him, chewing casually on a piece of jerky as if he were heading to a barbecue instead of a galactic tribunal. The council chamber was crowded with warlords, their eyes burning with curiosity and suspicion. Overlord Xyrr, towering above them all, demanded silence. He declared that Marcus Kane of Earth had passed the trials thus far and earned the right to be considered in negotiations. But before the cheers could swell, a booming voice interrupted. One of the conspirators stepped forward, his tusks gleaming, his eyes filled with fire. He accused Marcus of dishonor, claiming that the puzzle trial had been solved not with wit but with trickery, that the Marine had used hidden tools to manipulate the outcome. Another joined in, swearing that Marcus had been aided secretly during the combat trial, that his victory over the gladiator had been staged with false weapons. The chamber erupted in growls and shouts, warlords pounding their fists in anger, some demanding investigation, others already condemning Earth as liars. Marcus stood there, jaw tight, and muttered that of course they would try something like this. Harold leapt at the chance to salvage his dignity, rushing forward to plead with the council that Marcus's actions should not reflect on Earth's true diplomacy. He begged for them to consider the official envoy, himself, as the real representative. The warlords ignored him. Their eyes stayed fixed on Marcus, the man who had bled in the arena. Accusations filled the chamber, and for a moment it seemed Marcus would be executed on the spot. Then, from the shadows near the recording scribes, a voice piped up. It was small, hesitant, but it cut through the noise. A young alien scribe, barely more than an apprentice, stepped forward. His eyes were wide, his hands shaking as he carried the glowing tablet used to archive the trials. He declared that he had seen everything. He had recorded Marcus's every move, and there had been no trickery. The puzzle had indeed been solved by chance, the gladiator defeated with raw improvisation. He spoke nervously but firmly, insisting that to erase such a record would be to dishonor the truth of the gauntlet itself. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The conspirators snarled, trying to intimidate the scribe, but the overlord demanded the recordings be shown. The glowing runes filled the chamber air, replaying Marcus's clumsy yet undeniable actions. The warlords watched in silence, some chuckling as they saw the Marine accidentally solve the puzzle while eating, others roaring with renewed laughter at his brutal, messy fight with the gladiator. Yet the laughter this time was not mockery. It was genuine amusement mixed with respect. For all his rough edges, the Marine had fought without guile, without deception. The accusations began to collapse, and the conspirators who raised them found their own reputation stained. Marcus gave the young scribe a nod, a silent thank you, before turning back to the chamber. He raised his chin and growled that Earth did not need to cheat to survive. They were not perfect, but when pushed, they fought with everything they had. His words rang out with the blunt honesty the warlords now recognized as his trademark. The chamber rumbled with approving growls, but the conspirators slipped back into the shadows, their hatred boiling hotter than before. Harold was furious. His one chance to regain footing had been crushed by a trembling scribe and a Marine who refused to play by diplomatic rules. In private, he raged at Marcus, calling him a brute who was dragging Earth into barbarism. Marcus only laughed and reminded Harold that sometimes barbarism was the only language others understood. Harold clenched his fists, silently vowing that he would not let himself be written out of history. That night, Marcus walked the citadel corridors, the alien blade strapped to his back. The scribe approached him timidly, whispering that there were still those plotting in secret. The young alien confessed admiration for Marcus, admitting he had never seen anyone face the warlords without fear. Marcus chuckled, telling him fear was always there, but the trick was to ignore it until the fight was over. They shared a brief laugh, one small bridge of understanding in a place ruled by suspicion and blood. But as Marcus returned to his quarters, his instincts nagged at him. He knew the conspirators would not stop. They had failed to brand him a cheater, but they would try again, and next time they would strike harder. He leaned against the stone wall, staring at the distant stars through the slit window. Somewhere out there was Earth, oblivious to the schemes being woven in this alien citadel. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his blade and muttered that if the warlords wanted more proof, then he would give it to them, no matter how many times they tried to tear him down. The halls echoed faintly with alien songs of triumph, but beneath the music lay whispers of treachery. Marcus Kane had earned respect, but respect in the Dominion was never safe. It was a prize as fragile as glass, and enemies in the shadows were already sharpening their knives. The Warlord Council chamber was alive with tension, its air charged like a battlefield before the first gunfire. After days of trials, bloodshed, and accusations, the Overlord declared that words must now carry as much weight as weapons. The time had come not for combat, but for the final trial of diplomacy. It was a cruel twist for Marcus Kane, who was far more comfortable with a rifle than rhetoric. Yet the warlords demanded it. If Earth was to earn recognition, the Marine who had proven himself in the arena must now prove himself in speech. To them, his victories had shown strength, but could his tongue wield the same power as his fists? Harold Pendleton saw this as his moment to reclaim the spotlight. He adjusted his bow tie and stepped forward eagerly, rehearsed words already forming on his lips. He had suffered humiliation after humiliation, and here at last was his arena. But the Overlord raised a clawed hand and shook his head. The diplomat was not the one they wished to hear. The crowd bellowed Marcus's name, demanding the Marines speak for Earth. Harold's mouth hung open in disbelief, his face flushing scarlet as the truth sank in. The history he dreamed of writing had slipped from his grip entirely, and nothing he could say would bring it back. Marcus stood silently for a long moment, arms crossed, the weight of thousands of alien eyes pressing into him. He hated speeches, hated the way words twisted and bent until they meant nothing. He knew he wasn't eloquent. But he also knew that the Warlords respected honesty, and if there was one thing he could deliver without fail, it was blunt truth. He stepped forward, his boots echoing against the crystal floor, and faced the towering circle of tusked warriors. He told them flatly that Earth was no empire, no dominion, no galactic powerhouse. It was just a planet of stubborn survivors who fought with whatever they had. He admitted their weaknesses, their flaws, even their tendency to argue among themselves. But he swore that no matter the odds, Earth's people never stopped fighting back. The chambers shifted with murmurs, some scoffing, others nodding. Marcus did not stop. He leaned forward and told them he was not afraid of their laughter. He had lived through worse than insults. He had seen friends die and cities burn, and he had kept moving forward because stopping meant death. He mocked the Warlords for needing such grand rituals and trials just to test worthiness, saying that on Earth, worth was measured in the mud and blood of real battles, not in gilded arenas. Some growled at the insult, but others roared with approval, pounding their armored fists. The Marines' defiance, the lack of polish, struck them deeper than any delicate speech ever could. But just as the council chamber seemed to tilt in Earth's favor, the conspirators made their move. Hidden among the ranks, armored figures hurled accusations once more, shouting that Marcus's insolence was proof of humanity's barbarity. They declared that he was unfit to speak, that Earth must be crushed before its insolence spread. Before the Overlord could respond, the chamber doors exploded inward and squads of armed warriors stormed in. The coup had begun. Blades hummed with deadly energy as the rebels launched themselves at the council. Chaos erupted instantly. Harold screamed and dove for cover, while Marcus instinctively drew the alien blade at his back. The Warlords' council guards clashed with the conspirators in a storm of sparks and blood. The chambers shook with the sound of weapons and battle cries. Marcus leapt into the fray, his instincts guiding him as he cut down one attacker and disarmed another with a brutal knee to the chest. He shouted at the Earth delegation to stay low, though Harold was already curled behind an overturned bench muttering prayers. The Overlord himself rose from his throne, wielding a war hammer the size of a tree, striking down rebels with thunderous blows. Yet the conspirators were many, and their assault was coordinated. It was clear they had planned to eliminate both Marcus and the Overlord in one strike, securing dominance through bloodshed. Marcus fought shoulder to shoulder with loyalists, his muscles screaming with exhaustion from days of trials, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He found himself laughing mid-battle, not because it was funny but because the absurdity of it all had finally caught up with him. He had come to protect a diplomat, and now stood as Earth's last line of survival in a galactic coup. The young alien scribe appeared from the shadows, clutching a staff far too heavy for his frame. He swung it awkwardly at one of the rebels, knocking the warrior just enough off balance for Marcus to finish the job. Marcus barked at him to stay back, but the scribe shook his head, insisting that truth had to be fought for as much as recorded. Together they pressed forward through the chaos. As the fighting raged, Marcus caught sight of the lead conspirator, a towering warlord clad in blackened armor, his tusks capped in steel. He bellowed commands that rallied the rebels, his presence fueling their assault. Marcus knew instinctively that this was the heart of the coup. He pushed toward him, cutting a brutal path through the chaos, each step a gamble against death. The conspirator sneered when he saw Marcus coming and raised a double-bladed axe that glowed with searing energy. Their weapons clashed with a deafening crack, sparks flying as Marine and Warlord locked eyes in a test of sheer will. The duel was savage. The conspirator swung with devastating power, each strike shaking Marcus's bones. Marcus dodged narrowly, countering with quick, vicious thrusts, his blade biting into weak points in the armor. He taunted the warlord between gritted teeth, mocking his endless shouting, saying he sounded like a drill instructor trying to impress a mirror. The taunts enraged the conspirator, and in his fury, he overextended. Marcus seized the opening, slamming his shoulder into the warlord's chest and driving his blade deep into the seam between the tusk caps. The alien roared in agony before collapsing, his axe clattering to the floor. The momentum shifted. The rebels faltered without their leader, and the Overlord's loyalists pressed harder. Within minutes, the chamber was littered with the bodies of fallen conspirators, their coup crushed beneath the combined will of Earth's Marine and the Dominion's ruler. The Overlord raised his hammer high and declared the rebellion ended. The chamber shook with the victorious roar of warlords, the sound echoing through the citadel like a storm. Marcus staggered, his body battered, his blade dripping with blood. He looked around at the carnage, at Harold still cowering in a corner, and at the young scribe standing tall despite his fear. For the first time, Marcus realized the scope of what he had done. He had not just fought for survival. He had become part of the story that would define the future of two worlds. Yet even in that moment of triumph, he knew the final judgment had yet to be made. The Overlord would now decide whether Earth's defiance was worthy of peace or deserving of conquest. And as the Warlord Council regrouped around him, Marcus Kane braced himself for the verdict that would either save or doom his people.